Hawks, Hoops, Talk, and Squawk. Isiah Thomas. Still butthurt and emotional 30-some years later. Still mad you was left off the dream team. Man, it seems like every time you turn around, here this guy goes, trying to find ways to bash MJ and tear down his legacy. Meanwhile, Mike's sitting back chilling, golfing, enjoying his multi-billion-dollar status, whatever. You know this Mike don't respond to none of the nonsense. Nothing Isiah says or any of these talking heads or any of that mess for that matter. He just be sitting back, staying out of it. But every time you turn around, here comes Isiah Thomas coming out his mouth. Most recently, he talking about the 94 Bulls were still a championship team. Obviously, they wasn't because they got put out in the second round. Now, I know a lot of Jordan haters will be like, they like to bring up that Game 5 Hugh Hollins call. But come on, calls are missed all the time. There was still a Game 6 which the Bulls won to tie the series. And why didn't they go out there and win Game 7 in MSG? That Mike had to been on that team with a Game 7 in Madison Square Garden. He would have showed out and the Bulls would have won a Game 7 on the road. That's something they never did, by the way, during their dynasty years. The only 2 times they played a Game 7, it was always in Chicago. But anyway, Isiah Thomas talking about the Bulls was still a championship team. Say they had got past the Knicks. Who's to say that they would have definitely beat Indiana? And had they beat Indiana, they're not beating Houston in the finals. And that's another thing I got to address real quick. I see a lot of people talking about the Rockets only won those 2 titles because Mike had retired. But remember, he came back in '95. And the team that put the Bulls out, the Orlando Magic, was swept by the Rockets. Now, had Mike not retired, 94, I would still like the Bulls' chances. But 95, without Horace Grant and no real power forward, nah. But either way, you can use that excuse for any championship winner. You could say, well, if such and such wasn't hurt, or had Mike not retired, or had this player hadn't been suspended or whatever, you can use those scenarios any which way. But anyway, back to Isiah Thomas, who every time you turn around is saying something. Saying stuff that Mike wasn't on his radar in the 80s, and that he was Isaiah's 5th most worthy opponent. I know Magic, Bird, Kareem, and Doc were in the top 4, but Isiah, your Pistons never went up against the Sixers at any time in the 1980s. The only time the Sixers and Pistons ever squared off in the playoffs was during the 2000s. 2003, 2005, and 2008, the Pistons won each series. This was way past your bad boy days. This was the AI Sixer era versus Chauncey Billups and Ben Wallace. Well, Ben wasn't there in 08, but you still had Chauncey, Rip Hamilton, Tayshaun Prince, Rasheed Wallace. So the core players from that 04 Pistons championship team were still there. So how was Doc a bigger rival to you than MJ in the 80s, who you actually faced in the postseason in 88 and 89? And your Pistons teams were supreme to the Bulls. The only year I would say y'all 2 teams were kind of neck and neck was 1990, when Scottie Pippen had that migraine. Had Scotty not have had that migraine and put up his usual production, y'all wouldn't have won. The Bulls possibly would have won 4 straight titles in a row. I mean, we'll never know. But I mean, you're always talking, and all it's doing is hurting your legacy and credibility. Because you're definitely a top 5 point guard all time. Definitely the second best point guard of your era behind Magic Johnson. I mean, everybody knows that. So why all the MJ hate? Is it because you're from Chicago and Mike came to Chicago and took it over and became more beloved in your hometown than you? Yeah, I'm sure that's part of the reason. And even before y'all playoff matchups, Mike was lighting y'all up. Scored 61 on y'all, 59. Even in the playoffs during those so-called Jordan rules, Mike was still putting up numbers on y'all. Let's see. Let's go back to the 88 series. When they when y'all first went at it in the playoffs. Yeah, y'all won the series 4-1. But Mike, who averaged 27.4 now, y'all did hold him below his season average. He averaged what? 35 that year. So y'all did hold him below that. But I mean, Mike was only in his 4th year. His second best player during that series was Sam Vincent, who averaged just under 13 points a game. Your beloved Scottie Pippen, who was only a rookie, who everybody says was the reason Mike won his first series, playoff series, only averaged 9.4 games, despite starting in all 5 games. So yeah, Isaiah, 88, your Pistons were a title contender. But y'all didn't even become respectable to after Doc retired. Because from 80 to 86, the best teams in the East was always Philly, Boston, then Milwaukee was like that third wheel team. They were lucky to get to the conference finals a couple of years, 83, 84, and 86. But 1980 through 1987, it was Philly and Boston winning the East every year. Pistons didn't even really become a factor until 87. Yeah, y'all first made the playoffs in 84, that epic series where you and Bernard King went at it. But the Knicks won that 3-2 in the first round. 84-85, y'all got to the semifinals. Boston beat y'all 4-2. But at that time, y'all weren't a contender. At that time, y'all was still at best the 4th best team in the East behind Boston, Philly, and Milwaukee. 86, the Hawks put y'all out in the first round. That's when, you know what I mean, y'all drafted John Sally, Dennis Rodman. Then 86, 87, y'all became respectable, got to the conference finals. You know, you're the one that made that era pass, which Dennis Johnson, Larry Bird, my bad. You threw the pass to Larry Bird, who tosses to Dennis Johnson for the game-winning basket. Yeah, I know you probably still butthurt over that too, Isaiah. You know what I mean? At least Mike, who you love to bash so much, a year earlier put up a playoff career high, NBA playoff record that still stands, 63 points against basically that same Celtics team, just a better version, because the 87 Celtics were banged up. But it's just, Isaiah Thomas talks like a guy that never won nothing. That's the part that cracks me up. And you love to go on and say that you're the only one that beat Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and Michael Jordan in the playoffs, which is true, except for the fact that during the 89 playoffs, because I've heard people say, Piston fans mostly, that Isiah Thomas is the only guy to beat Bird, Jordan, and Magic in the same playoff run, but that's just not true. That's not true at all. Because first off, in 89, Larry Bird only played 6 games during the regular season. He missed the entire season except for those 6 games, but he wasn't even on the playoff roster. Now, yeah, you did beat Bird in 88. You also beat Mike in 88 and 89. But as far as the finals, Magic Johnson was hurt. He got hurt in game 1. He played in game 2 and put up decent numbers. Only played 5 minutes in game 3 and missed game 4. So, you know what I mean? Go on and brag on, oh, you're the only one to beat those 3 guys when Magic wasn't even Magic during 89. Who's to say Lakers could have possibly three-peated had y'all hadn't had those injuries? You know what I mean? I know Byron Scott was hurt too. You know, because that Laker team had swept through the West playoffs 11-0. They came into the finals undefeated. Yeah, matter of fact, Byron Scott didn't even play during the finals. He got hurt. That's right, he got hurt in practice. Pat Riley ran that team to death. I low-key blame him for those injuries. I mean, your team went 11-0. I understand you want to keep the team sharp for the finals, but, and it's been documented how excruciating those practices would be during the Showtime era. So, with a healthy Magic and the addition of Byron Scott, we might not even be talking about the Pistons as the 89 champions. I mean, people don't even think about that. And that's another thing. The Pistons 89 playoff run. Yeah, they went 15-2. But they swept a Larry Birdless Boston Celtics team in the first round. And then the next round they beat the Detroit Pistons. I mean, they beat the Milwaukee Bucks. They swept them in the next round. Terry Cummings, the Bucks' leading scorer, played just 1 game because he was hurt. So that's what man, the Bulls handed that Pistons team their only 2 losses of the 89 playoffs. But like I said, y'all still get credit for being champions. It was well deserved. Then y'all went back to back the following year, beating a pretty good Portland team. That 1990 Portland team is neck and neck with the 92 Portland team. Like those 3 seasons, 89-90 through 91-92, that was a prime championship caliber Portland Trailblazers team. They just ran up into 2 great teams in the Detroit Pistons and Chicago Bulls. But Isaiah keep talking shit about Mike, still butthurt over being left off the Dream Team. Guess what? Magic and Bird didn't want you on that team either. Charles Barkley didn't want you on the team. Karl Malone, none of those players really wanted you. Your own coach, Chuck Daly, who you won 2 NBA titles with, didn't even want you. You know that y'all walking off the floor as the Bulls were sweeping y'all, then Bill Lane Bear takes the blame. So what? You're still the team captain. And people talk about, oh, well, when we won, the Celtics walked off and didn't congratulate us or shake our hands. But guess what? They didn't blatantly walk by the bench, ignoring y'all either. And this is where people lack common sense. Yeah, it might have been disrespectful to walk off without congratulating you, but they didn't walk by your bench the way the Pistons did it was just pure disrespect. You know, so bringing up, oh, well, the Celtics did that is irrelevant. Nobody was talking about the Celtics walking off, but, and I got to be honest, the Pistons' whole style of play during that era, trying to injure people, and Isiah, you talking shit like, oh, Mike cried to the commissioner, and they made the game soft or whatever because of Mike. Nah, y'all was really out there trying to hurt people. Like, I was young, but I watched the games during those times, and y'all were bullies. You know what I mean? Y'all did a lot of slick shit on the court, which, you know what I mean, was uncalled for. You know what I mean? The way y'all foul people and all that. Then now that, you know what I mean, you want to cry victim. And another thing Isiah's butthurt about is when his own college coach, what he said, man, own college coach, Bobby Knight. Well, Bobby Knight, Mike hadn't even played the NBA game yet, and Bobby Knight said, this is the best player he's ever seen. Meanwhile, Isiah, y'all won a NCAA championship together in 1981, just 3 years earlier. 3 years later, he's calling a 21-year-old who hadn't even played an NBA game yet, calling him the greatest player he's ever seen. So those things right there still got Isiah butthurt all these years later. Every time you turn around, he's trashing MJ, but during the 90s when the Bulls was winning titles, even before that, the Bulls won their first title, you was giving him praise. Like, what happened? Are you on a certain agency's payroll that's paying you to talk this nonsense? I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. But you could just tell he's genuinely still in his emotions over the whole Dream Team thing. You know what I mean? It is blatantly obvious. You know what I mean? John Stockton was a great replacement. All-time leader, his assists and steals. But I said, no matter how much people like to trash him, they only trash him to fit their weak, whack narratives. Stockton is a top all-time point guard, and definitely one of the top five point guards of the 90s. You know what I mean? So the Dream Team was just fine without you. I think the chemistry wouldn't have been as swift as it was had Isiah been on the team. You know, and I say that all the time. Okay, that might not have been the same. Back to the 89 Milwaukee Bucks. Terry Cummings nor Paul Pressey played or hardly played in that series against the Pistons. But you know, injuries is a part of the game. You can critique a lot of past champions, like this past Celtics championship team. You know what I mean? Each round they were missing a key player. You know what I mean? Jimmy Butler in the first round. Donovan Mitchell in the second round. Tyrese Halliburton in the conference finals. So that's not taking away their title. But when players like Isiah like to nitpick, saying stuff like, oh, the Bulls were still a championship team without MJ, and he didn't start winning until we got old, and he also loves to use the fact that he was hurt in 91. Granted, he did miss 34 games, and even that year's All-Star team, I believe, still doesn't change anything. You were still there and healthy during the playoffs, healthy enough to where you played. Injuries is a part of the game. But not only did the Bulls end their championship run, they went on a three-peat. Mike retired, came back a year and a half later, Then they won another three-peat with 3 of your ex-Bad Boy teammates, headlined by Dennis Rodman. John Sally was on the 96 team, as well as James Edwards. So, Isiah Thomas, you're a great player. You're still one of my all-time favorite players. Like, as a youngin', I loved watching you with the Pistons. You know, y'all had a great team, but all this shit, you years later, it's like you're trying to get Mike to respond. I don't think Mike's ever going to respond to you. Then you know he's still butthurt. Isiah's still butthurt over The Last Dance. Well, Mike said he don't like Isiah or can't stand him or whatever. Man, you knew that. And are you surprised? I mean, but it is what it is. And I did this video too because a Pistons fan was going back and forth with me on this topic, saying some of the same nonsense Isiah is saying, like, well, if the Pistons weren't hurt in 91, the Bulls wouldn't have won. The Pistons would have beat them and beat the Lakers again. Yeah, coulda, woulda, shoulda. You can make the what ifs and the coulda, woulda, shouldas for any topic in sports, shit, life in general. But anyway, what else do I gotta mention? I mean, as far as Mike not being on his radar in the 80s, but Doc, come on, like when Doc and the Sixers were at their heights, nobody was even talking about you and the Pistons. Matter of fact, you and Kelly Tripucka were all-stars in 82, 83, and still didn't make the playoffs. So it's like, make it make sense. You know, great player nonetheless, but, and then you got to remember too, your comments is what started a lot of this MJ slander, and now you're in your feelings even more because of Anthony Edwards' recent statements about Mike being the only skilled player during his era. But we know what all that's about. No need to even get into that topic. But now Isiah's mad. Well, that's what happens when you start attacking players you competed against. If you were smart, you would be singing Mike and the Bulls' praises, saying how they were a great team. They ended our championship run. Then they went on to dominate the decade. Like, you would be more respected. You would be more respected if you came off like that, instead of just throwing shade every time you turn around. I wonder what he's going to say next. Next, he's going to say Horace Grant was the best power forward in the league during that time. Like Charles Barkley and Karl Malone didn't even exist. Then he's going to say that B.J. Armstrong was just as good as him, but Michael Jordan was holding him back because he was a ball hog. Like, who knows what Zeke is going to say next. You know, but this is some Hawks Hoops Talk and Squawk. Like and share the video. Subscribe to the channel. Stay tuned for more content. Hawk out.